What is up everybody, Jay the Great here, and in today's video, we'll be discussing a quite interesting topic that I believe hasn't been discussed amongst creators within the Naruto community and or fandom yet, with that being Heavy Sasuke versus early Shippuden Gaara. Also, once again, to join me on this topic, I have my good friend who's also very knowledgeable in Naruto as well, Shinobi. Did you want to introduce yourself to the people, Shinobi?
Going on, guys? Shoutout here, discussing round two with these guys. Let's get it.
Yes, sir. So we decided this topic would be interesting to delve into, as both Sasuke and Gaara had a mutual opponent in Datara, where they both performed well in different ways, essentially. Hence, with them having a mutual opponent, naturally we asked ourselves who between these two is the superior shinobi, leading us to decide that we will be analyzing the context and performances and their respective battles against Datara, as well as any other relevant empirical evidence that will aid us in matching these characters against each other. Now, an additional reason for this video is we've actually seen some misconceptions and miscalculations floating around the community as far as Heavy Sasuke's scaling is concerned, with some people even deeming him as KC1 Naruto and beyond as far as caliber, which is certainly questionable. Hence, with this video, we hope to shine some light on where Heavy Sasuke realistically scales in the verse. So the way in which we will go about this video is we will have the specific iterations of each character that battled Datara match up against each other, with them being in character as far as tendencies and behaviors are concerned. We will discuss several relevant aspects of their scaling, comparing these two shinobi as we go along with the discussion, where we will have a point system giving a point for each aspect to the shinobi we deem to be superior for each aspect of scaling we discuss. We will then conclude the video by giving a consensus on who would most likely be triumphant in this altercation, and we will even give the probability of each combatant winning as well to top it off. So with the preface of the video out of the way, let's get straight into it. So we will first begin by discussing AP. Now, did you want to give your thoughts on this first, Shinobi, on the AP of Gaara?
Yeah, absolutely. So, when analyzing the AP scaling for both these combatants, Sasuke seems to have the better showing, having abilities such as Kirin, for example, that could wipe out the Uchiha hideout in his engagement against Itachi.
Yep.
Even though Sasuke doesn't use this against Deidara, it doesn't mean necessarily he doesn't have it outright. For one, that specific jutsu was meant to be used for Itachi at the end of the day, and there are prerequisites that need to be met before manifesting the lightning dragon from above. Sasuke would have to use an excessive amount of fireball jutsus, which in reality wouldn't be practical, seeing as Gaara is an earth style user, and using his right tone or lightning style would prove more useful or practical. Gaara's arsenal isn't meant for heavy hitting attacks per se, more so he manipulates sand to engulf his enemy, and crushing them or his limbs is the goal. So, in this matchup, Sasuke takes a nod overall with having feats with the CM2 Chidori, which is at least a 10 times bare minimum amp on his already base stats. We do know the lightning based nature of his Chidori is more suitable for Earth style, and we've seen more impressive feats with the Chidori Spear, for example, which took down the C2 Dragon in Datara.
Yeah, so to Steelman Shinobi's AP sort of conclusion and scaling of both, in which I agree on, I'll start out with Gaara's here and his AP. In his battle against Datara, with his special sand that is within his gourd, he's able to crush Datara's arm, allowing us to imply his special sand's PSI is sufficient enough to crush a shinobi to death with enough volume. This indicates that at any given moment, as long as Gaara still possesses a sufficient amount of chakra, his sand can crush his opponents with that level of durability. And I'll also add that as far as the sand he utilizes from the environment directly, especially when he's able to use vast amounts of it, it is easy to deduce that with enough sand he can crush his opponents with regular sand from the environment again, as well as the very weight of enough sand as well as enough applied pressure via Gaara's control would suffice as well in crushing his opponents. Now, as far as Sasuke, aside from his Kirin, he doesn't seem to possess large area of effect high AP abilities like Gaara, who is capable of doing such with his sand, but more so high AP penetrative attacks with a smaller area of effect, such as his Chidori and other lightning natured attacks. He also possesses, like Shinobi said, various fire natured ninjutsu, such as his Great Dragon Fire Jutsu, which is capable of manipulating the atmosphere in his fight against Itachi, but to be fair, Itachi's Amaterasu and own fire style ninjutsu aided in this feat as well. However, going back to Kirin specifically, with the right prerequisites met, it possesses levels of AP at least high enough to destroy a landmass around the size of a large hill, up until possibly the size of a small city block when analyzing the approximate size of the Uchiha hideout that Kirin destroyed in this instance. Also note, which I think is very important to note, that Sasuke at this point in time with his feat was not in CM2, here indicating that with at least a 10 tails amp, which is provided by the CM2 form, Kieran would actually destroy more than likely significantly more landmass than it did in this instance, with this amplification being provided and the same environmental prerequisites met as well. Now, to give my conclusion on the AP here, like Shinobi did, in which I agree with, Sasuke has the elemental nature advantage, which is a huge advantage against Gaara, especially who's able to use large volumes of sand in the right terrain. He would be able to negate earth-natured attacks from Gaara, indicating in battle Sasuke's lightning-based attacks would bypass the durability, which we'll discuss further as well, of Gaara's sand more often than not, especially if Kirin is used as well, being very high in AP itself. Essentially, in layman's terms, with the elemental advantage, Sasuke in theory does not need the same volume of ninjutsu or lightning based attacks to bypass Gaara's sand because, again, of the elemental advantage. So, in theory, he is able to most likely bypass even high volumes of sand at times with a lower volume when assessing the volume of his own attack because of, again, the lightning based nature negating the earth based nature attacks. So that's actually something to keep in mind as well. However, the advantage Gaara has, conversely, is that he can, in fact, use a large area of effect high AP abilities such as his special sand and or sand from the environment that he can manipulate, again in vast quantities, as evident by the Datara fight, indicating the theoretical possibility that conversely, the sheer amount of Gaara's sand could possibly be too much for Sasuke to cut through, even with the elemental nature advantage, if he's not using something such as Kirin, which is large in volume itself. However, to be fair, I see this as unlikely, given Sasuke's ability and given Sasuke's cutthroat nature in battle and tendencies as well, so I don't think he would allow a large amount of sand to engulf him nor take over him, as he has the advantage in another aspect we will discuss later on. So Sasuke being able to attend a 10 times amp, as well as having the elemental advantage as well, would most likely give him the AP advantage in most situations in a set of infinite scenarios. So we both deduced that Sasuke would get a point in the AP aspect, most likely having the advantage in this one. But did you have any final thoughts on the AP comparisons or Sasuke having the AP advantage?
Um, no, honestly, like we've kind of seen the extent of Sasuke's Kirin, if you will, with all prerequisites met,
Yeah.
and the extent of the damage that it could do to said terrain per se. And with Gaara, it's not really like that extent of AoE. It's more so, like you said, manipulating the terrain around him to use enough PSI to crush his opponent,
Yeah.
which is impressive, but the extent to do on a terrain, for example, or even what he can do with his penetration abilities with Chidori or Chidori Spear or even Senbon. It's just more impressive overall in terms of diversity and just pure power as well. So I
Exactly.
definitely would give the nod to Sasuke as well. Absolutely.
Yeah. Um, Before I move on, yeah, like Shinobi said, what's interesting about Gaara's arsenal, which a lot of people tend to overlook, is that while he does have the disadvantage in AP, he has the ability to implement a consistent level of AP due to having the ability to use a large volume of sand. So imagine a gigantic sand tsunami coming at you with a consistent level of PSI in a grand scale, right? So that's what's impressive about him and is the only sort of nod you give him here. But like me and Shinobi said, he has the overall AP disadvantage as far as specific levels of AP overall, especially having the elemental disadvantage. So yeah, Sasuke gets the point in this one. So next up, we will be discussing durability. Shinobi, did you want to start off on this one, on the comparisons and the durability of each?
Yeah, absolutely, bud. So yeah, when comparing the defensive capabilities of these two shinobi, Gaara with having the Shikaku infused sand, for example, in my opinion, would grant him the edge. Not only does Gaara protect himself from all bombs thrown at him, for example, the C1 bombs thrown from Datara, his sand is also enough in terms of durability to tank a C3 level bomb that would have done massive damage, if not wipe out the whole village outright, if indeed it did hit. That's a bigger area of AoE than what we saw with the Kirin, for example, with Sasuke, with all prerequisites met with the Amaterasu, Fireball Jutsus, you name it, right? We did say he wasn't base, so if he wasn't CM2, it would have been stronger, obviously, but based off what we did see, it wouldn't have been as big of an impact as the bomb that Daedra did, for example. So we have to take in mind that the topography of these two are in question, though, being that the Sand Village can give Gaara an advantage with the durability. This is even commented on by Datara. Gaara is able to make sand out of natural minerals in any environment, but it is not as practical or suitable as it is in the Sand Village per se.
Yeah.
The sand has an innate instinct to protect Gaara thanks to his mother's spirit, and so catching him off guard would take incredible speed, which we will get into later. But nonetheless, in terms of durability, Sasuke's best feat really is in his CM2 iteration, in which he does unfortunately take a missile from the C2 Dragon with Datara. He's kind of cornered in a situation where, like, there are landmines underneath him and there are missiles from above, so his best outcome in that situation was to use his wing, and in which took sustainable damage. It literally blew the wing off. So, and that was a C2 missile after all, which we can rationally say has less potency than the C3 golem that Data was able to protect against with just his sand alone. So, in terms of intangibles or abilities, Gaara takes the edge. In terms of like just defensive, I guess, tangible defenses, I would say perhaps Sasuke would take the edge, but it's not really something to take much note of because Gaara's sand is part of his arsenal and what he uses at all times instinctively. So, in my opinion, out of the two of these guys, Gaara definitely takes the edge.
Yeah, so I definitely agree with the conclusion. I'll definitely against Steelman on the durability aspect discussion. So we of course have to discuss the durability of Gaara's sand itself rather than the Gaara's durability individually, as he heavily utilizes the sand defensively when engaged in battle. By far, like Shinobi already iterated, the most impressive showing of the sand's durability was when it protected the sand village and tanked the explosion of Datara's C3 clay bomb explosive, which was implied by Datara to be enough to destroy the entire sand village possibly. Hence, essentially, the more sand under Gaara's control, the higher the durability as the density increases as well as the amount of volume, resulting in more force being required to strain and fracture the sand mass in question. Now, we clearly can't objectively scale the durability of the sand, as many variables simply can't be calculated objectively, such as acceleration of the sand, exact mass of the sand, angular momentum, linear momentum, etc. But we can say that Gaara sand is capable of at least reaching levels of durability enough to tank small city to perhaps blatant city level attacks. And I will go as far as to say most likely even beyond that, as Gaara was fighting Datara while also protecting the village, meaning he had to use his sand methodically to ensure success rather than utilize it all in a all-out attack like he did against Kimimaro in part 1 with his sand tsunami. So keep that in mind, folks. Now, as far as Sasuke's durability, with the Orochimaru absorbed, he certainly gained a buff in durability, even stating that he heals more quickly compared to the past, implying a tougher body as well. Now, in his battle against Datara, like Shinobi already said, we see him survive and to an extent tank a point blank range explosive from Datara while in his CM2 form, which that bomb being at a C2 level, where he would then be able to continually battle Datara after, thanks to his enhanced physiology due to, again, Orochimaru's absorption and the curse mark most likely amplifying his durability as well. So aside from this though, there isn't much more to extrapolate to scale Sasuke's durability, with his only battle being against an ill holding back Itachi aside from this fight, which doesn't provide much when extrapolating his durability. Also note that Sasuke in general is someone that doesn't have very high levels of durability in comparison to Gaara, as his default tendency is to avoid attacks in general, because of his high battle IQ and finesse ability, thanks to the Sharingan, thanks to his high level of speed, etc. So this just further reinforces that Sasuke isn't a tanky type sort of combatant anyway, in comparison to Gaara, who uses his sand to tank attacks rather than evade most of the time, especially a large area of effect attack like the C3. So keep that in mind as well. So in conclusion, when comparing these two combatants, Gaara would take it here as his sand displays much higher levels of durability than Heavy Sasuke ever does throughout the narrative. However, please note that again, Sasuke's elemental advantage would, at least to some arbitrary degree, nullify the durability of Gaara's sand, which would certainly be exploited by Sasuke, given his intelligence and high battle IQ. Hence, we both conclude that the point here should in fact go to Gaara, with him now having 1 point as well. Did you have any final thoughts though on the durability comparison?
Um, yeah, honestly, it just seems to be more in favor with Gaara, but again, like we've already notated, the Advantage of Gaara's durability or defensive capabilities, if you will, really does stem down to the amount of scan he has to manipulate. It really is basic science. It comes down to density, which is mass over volume, you know? So it's
Yeah.
like the more volume of sand you have to manipulate, the more mass, it means more durability, obviously. So it is situational, but in terms of what we have seen in comparisons with data, for example, based off empirical evidence, the nod would go to Gaara in terms of what he was able to defend against, and instinctually, if you will, as well. So it was quite an impressive feat, to say the least. Definitely.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, like Shinobi said, before we move on to the next aspect, something to note about Gar's durability, or more specifically, Sand's durability, is it varies. It's not a consistent level of durability because Gaara is not always using the same volume of sand in different scenarios or in different altercations. So, terrain certainly matters. The volume utilized certainly matters. The type of sand he's using, i.e., either the gourd sand or the environmental sand, matters as well, as the properties are different. So there are many variables, mostly volume, that help us to determine the level of durability Gaara sand possesses, right? But the general trend or the general conclusion is that the more volume that Gaara is manipulating, the more volume of sand rather, the higher the level of durability as the density increases and hence the level of force to bypass it must be higher. So that's essentially what you have Gar, which actually is something very interesting that most people overlook when it comes to his durability or his Sand's durability rather. So there you guys have it for that one. So this next aspect is quite likely the most controversial and complex to discuss, as it seems many people misunderstand and or misrepresent the speed of Gar's sand. Now we thought it would be necessary to first debunk the common misconception that Gaara's sand is somehow above the likes of the 4th Raikage's full speed, as he was able to intercept A's attack when attempting to kill 5 Kage Summit Sasuke. So the reason this claim is incorrect is because of the simple fact that the Raikage did not attack Sasuke with a linear attack, nor used linear momentum, hence nor velocity himself, but rather attempted to drop from above to kill Sasuke with a guillotine drop. This indicates that the Raikage wasn't near his full speed, as only gravity alone was aiding him in creating acceleration to increase force as opposed to his own body speed aiding him, like it did versus Minato, for example, when he did in fact use his full speed. Hence, no, Gaara's sand speed is not at that level of speed, and is certainly not displayed to be so in the Deidara fight. In fact, with that fight, you can prove via contradiction that his sand is in fact not that speed, as Deidara would have no shot of defeating someone at light speed, as he was even inferior to Heavy Sasuke in speed, who he neither had that level of speed. Hence, proof via contradiction proves that Gaara's sand is in fact not at that level of speed, and his sand is certainly not capable of reaching levels of speed at least sub-relativistic to the speed of light, which the 4th Raikage is capable of doing. So yeah, that's to debunk that. But did you have anything to add on to the claim that Gaara's speed is somehow as fast or faster than the Raikage?
Oh yeah, I completely agree. You know, it's really important to understand that Gaara was in a very powerful place when he had Shikaku. When he got removed, he had to go through a very arduous experience training and developing as a shinobi entirely again after that, you know. So to see his performance against Data per se and to see his sand speed at that current instance, if you will, and compare that to the 5 Kage Summit instance where he blocks the Raikage's attack. It's not that long of a time lapse, if you will. And like Jay said, there's a lot of context as to how that situation went down. It wasn't like a linear attack, it was going downwards. It's more like terminal velocity. So the comparison with his full speed is just it's just disanalogous, if you will. And so Gaara's speed with Data, as we're about to mention here, it just wasn't fast at all, not near light speed, if you will. So to say that he can go light speed with his sand in a couple of months is just very fallacious to claim entirely. It just doesn't make sense narratively. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So.
exactly. So we definitely had to discuss that, as that is a typical claim we hear quite commonly throughout the fandom, and it's certainly a
Mhm.
misconception on Gaara's sand speed when actually analyzing the contextual parameters of the event in which he intercepted the Raikage's attack. So we definitely have to add that first. But now, when actually scaling Gaara's speed authentically, there are two significant factors to consider, which are that one, Deidara lacked killer intent, only wanting to capture Gaara, and two, Gaara had to fight off Deidara while also defending the village, indicating he was unable to fight in a direct one-on-one confrontation, where the playing field would be more fair. So Gaara's sand is displayed blitzing Deidara, which resulted in his arm being crushed, and also displaying speeds even in large quantities, being enough to stop a falling C3 bomb from Deidara. However, to be fair to Deidara then iterates that with his arm being crushed, he implies that it was allowed, or perhaps allowed partially, to go on to implement his ploy, which was to sort of engrave or dig small clay bombs into the sand that would later be used to defend Gaara, which would then lead to his defeat with the bombs blowing up in his face, literally simply just digging themselves out of the sand and into the inside of the dome in which Gaara was present. So keep that in mind and put an asterisk on the speed feat that Gaara is able to accomplish, as once again, Deidara arguably allowed his arm to be crushed there, so you gotta keep that in mind. Furthermore, in his encounter with Deidara, there is enough empirically to deduce, being generous, that there is possibly a level of relativity between Deidara and Gaara's sand speed. However, Deidara is arbitrarily superior, to at bare minimum, to Gaara's sand, as he was able to have the upper hand in that battle. But however, this is quite contentious because again, Gaara was having to defend while also combating in an offensive manner as well. So I wouldn't even blame you if you believe them to be quite relative in speed, but overall it's quite a contentious topic. So at the very best, you can conclude that Gaara is relative to Deidara in speed. More specifically, his sand is relative in terms of speed. But did you have anything to add to Gaara's speed here with this altercation?
Yeah, so it seems like Gaara does have relative speed to Datara in terms of his sand. Of course, it is contextual because Datara, like you've iterated already, wasn't going all out. Really limited his amount of abilities that he could partake in per se. We see his sand chasing Data throughout the whole engagement. It's referred upon by Data to have lightning fast speeds, and that's more so the sand and Gaara's gourd, if you will. Even though it's nearly the same speed, the sand never really had a chance to threaten Data unless it was intentional with the arm crushing, if you will, which was a ploy at the end of the day to embed, those clay bombs in the sand that in return would instinctively go back to Gar as a defense and return led to his demise, right?
Yeah.
And also there was the moment with the massive, what I like to say, the Sand Chibaku Tensei.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's contextual because Data threw some bombs at him, thought he got him, and then all of a sudden, because and credence to Gara and his manipulation of the terrain, he summons this massive prison around Data, but almost instantly Data gets out of it. So it really never seems that the sand speed, if you will, is a threat to Data. The only time it does really do damage to Data, quote unquote, is intentional because that damage led to even more damage on Gara. So it was just like a chess game, if you will. He was using the limited clay he had, for example, his limited abilities, his objective of capturing Gara. He had to be very strategical in implementing these tacticians, which maybe sacrificed an arm. He didn't lose anything. It was very tactical, and I think it needs more context. But in terms of the sand speed per se with Gara, it's relative to some degree, but I don't think it's enough to really threaten Data at the end of the
Exactly.
day if he was going all out. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So more than likely, the conclusion is that Gaara's sand speed is relative, but arbitrarily inferior to Datara's speed, especially considering he was holding back. So there you have for Gaara's speed. Now, as far as Sasuke's speed, we see Datara and Tobi concede that Sasuke is faster than them both, with obviously Tobi, aka Obito, lying in that narrative to continue on to carry out his fake identity for the sake of his plot and his ploy with the Infinite Tsukuyomi. But regardless, Datara admits inferiority. With Datara here, unlike against Gaara, having killer intent with him despising the Uchiha quite deeply actually, after his humiliating loss to Itachi prior. In this battle, we see Sasuke seemingly always a step ahead of Datara in terms of battle strategy and speed as well, which forced Datara to use his C0 in one final attack, once he realized he was figured out and bested by Sasuke. Additionally, the way in which Deidara implemented his battle strategy limited Sasuke's movement via landmines set up by Tobi and airborne missiles via Deidara's clay bombs, indicating that Sasuke was still able to have this speed advantage even with disadvantageous parameters implemented against him. Additionally, another aspect we like to discuss, which is relevant enough, is his airborne speed, because as we all know, in his CN2 form, he has wings. The best deduction we could come to as far as that is concerned is that by default, he tends to use his body speed rather than his airborne levitation ability, implying that his body speed is superior more than likely than his flying speed, which is something we thought was relevant enough to discuss here. So overall, it is clear that Sasuke is physically faster than a Deidara that is going all out and attempting to absolutely annihilate him due to his hate for the Uchiha. But what is your thoughts on Sasuke's speed here in this altercation?
Sasuke's a beast, man. I'll tell you what, bro.
Yeah,
In
definitely.
comparison and really looking at this, Sasuke really was like doing work. So yeah, like you mentioned, stated by Toby at the time, right? He says it's too fast for the both of them, but he uses a commonly right away,
Yeah,
and this is
literally.
really no threat. So yeah, that's not even questionable. But
Yeah,
Data agrees with Toby not only once but twice afterwards, really deeming Sasuke as a real threat in terms of speed. Sasuke dodges the C2 missiles, dodges the landmines, which he does already see thanks to his Sharingan. And he does this with like his CM2 using like the aerial mobility of his wings, in time to evade all explosions, if you will. He also deduces how far away the C4 AoE nanoscopic bomb cloud, if you will, would affect, and he dodges that in time as well before it does take any effect on him in totality. So, just in terms of just raw speed feats, we see Sasuke be relevant enough to strike down the C2 Dragon. He uses two Demon Wind Shuriken on Deidara, strikes him down with that as well. I mean, he does a lot of things to Datara when Datara is going all out, mind you, which is very
yeah,
important to look at the speed feats of these two combatants. So, considering that in context, Sasuke just had a lot more noteworthy feats to look upon, and was confirmed by Datara multiple times just to reinforce that notion. So, yeah, in my opinion, after looking at this, Sasuke definitely takes a nod. Absolutely.
exactly. So, like we said in conclusion, when it comes to speed, given the available empirical evidence, it is easier to conclude Sasuke is a superior combatant in terms of speed, as Deidara admits inferiority to Sasuke when it comes to speed and is visibly shown bested in physical combat as well when combating Sasuke, while conversely, against Gaara, he was able to execute a successful attack enough to make Gaara go unconscious. But again, to be fair, Gaara was distracted, protecting the sand while simultaneously combating Deidara, indicating an effort to combat Deidara while also defending the village, which allows us to imply at the very least that perhaps Gaara's speed is a little bit higher than what was displayed in this fight. But however, overall, with the empirical evidence available, it is more likely that Sasuke is in fact superior in combat speed, especially considering again that Deidara was trying to annihilate Sasuke and take his life, while conversely he wasn't trying to take Gaara's life. So Sasuke is a superior combatant in terms of speed. Sasuke gets the point in this aspect as well. Now, moving on to the next aspect, we thought this next aspect would be relevant enough to discuss, especially considering the many factors that will be part of the equation in this matchup, with this aspect being intelligence. So, Gaara displays decent intelligence in his battle against Deidara, deducing Deidara is a threat, as no birds like Deidara's clay bomb birds aesthetically inhabit the area, and also uses his sand very cleverly, most of the time, mostly defensively, to defend himself and the sand village when Deidara uses C3. However, he is outsmarted by Deidara when Deidara implants small clay bombs in Gaara's sand after getting his arm crushed by it, which gave Datara the victory, being able to detonate the clay bombs within the actual small sand dome protecting Gaara. But what did you think about Gaara's intelligence here? What would you deem his intelligence as?
Yeah, so Gaara isn't really someone who isn't necessarily intelligent. Gaara it has a mastery of the topography that is unmatched in the village. He deduces the bombs and their functionality. Was the first to face off Daedra because before he was able to continue upon his covert operation, being able to deduce that, hey, that bird's looking kind of strange. Let me go check that out, right? He uses his extra eye ability to give him more intel in terms of FOV. So with his abilities, he is able to deduce things at quite a fast rate, I would say. But it's really more so a lack of his intangibles, which we will get into later, that doesn't give him the intel, if you will, in comparison to Sasuke, which in return does grant him more knowledge.
Exactly. So Sasuke in his battle with Deidara shows very good intelligence and deduction ability, quickly deducing the workings and elemental nature of Deidara's attacks, mostly thanks to the Sharingan and his high deduction and absorption ability, intelligence-wise, which would be the catalyst for Sasuke's plan to use his own elemental advantage to defuse any and all of Deidara's clay bombs, from the landmines to even the nanoscopic bombs as well. In fact, Deidara is shocked by Sasuke's intelligence near the end of the battle, questioning how Sasuke was able to deduce the workings of his abilities so quickly. Hence, it is easy to observe why Sasuke is said to have one of the highest battle IQs in the Naruto verse. But yeah, did you have any thoughts on Sasuke's intelligence here? What do you think about his performance, intelligence-wise?
Yeah, so in my opinion, this one is a lot more in favor of Sasuke for sure. Unfortunately, like I've said earlier, it really isn't Gaara's intelligence per se that gives him a disadvantageous state. It's rather his abilities like the Sharingan that Sasuke does possess, and which grants him visionary intelligence in seeing the nanoscopic bombs, seeing the landmines, seeing the hand signs that Deidara weaves, which are Earth sign, which he's able to deduce. Hey, like my Senbone negated the functionality of these bombs, and he makes hypotheses. Uh, Also reestablishes his theories by doing certain things with the landmines, the Chidori Amp sword, for example, and on a whim, obviously Sasuke's never seen Deidara's abilities before, and Deidara did a lot more against Sasuke in comparison to Gaara with the C4, the C2 Dragon,
Yeah.
the C0, etc. And on a whim, and with the extra intelligence he gained from the Sharingan, Sasuke was able to deduce how to negate the functionality within his own body from exploding. He was able to deduce from the get go the lightning and earth style relationship to one another. And and just so in comparison, Sasuke had to deduce more on a whim while Deidara was going all out, bloodlusted, fueled by Itachi, hatred for Uchiha, etc. Adversely, um, Gaara didn't show as much in terms of intelligence. Number one, because of his lack of intangibles, and number two, because Data just didn't do as much against him, and he still fell at the end of the day. Of course, there is context to consider with the village having to be protected, the expenditure of chakra, etc. But in terms of empirical evidence, Sasuke really had a great showing in this battle in comparison.
To steal Man Shinobi's conclusion, because we both agree on this, and to sum up this aspect and who takes it, we must first acknowledge, like Shinobi already did, and note that it can be said that Sasuke's intelligence seems more impressive due to him possessing an elemental advantage and the Sharingan, which again, like Shinobi said, are two tools that Gaara clearly did not possess when combating Deidara. Hence, a lot of the intelligent feats were able to be achieved because of the tools Sasuke did in fact possess, while conversely, Gaara was clearly not capable of achieving these same feats because of the tools that he does not possess, again, that Sasuke does, such as the Sharingan. However, regardless of this, and despite the false equivalency when comparing their intelligence, as again, one possesses more advantageous tools than the other, Sasuke does in fact possess a higher level of intelligence, as he simply has more impressive intelligence feats against Deidara, and even in other battles, such as against Itachi, while conversely, Gaara simply lacks the intelligent feats to put him above someone of the caliber of Sasuke. Now, to further reinforce the premise that Sasuke is more intelligent, Sasuke, on a whim, more than not, very commonly and more often than Gaara, is able to deduce the workings of Deidara's abilities at a very, very quick rate, implying his very high battle IQ and very high deduction ability, high rate deduction ability in comparison to Gaara. Gaara wasn't able to deduce the workings of the clay bombs themselves as quickly per se. Again, you could say the Sharingan aided Sasuke which certainly was an advantage again that Gaara did not have. However, even with the clay bombs that are visible, Gaara never came to the conclusion that Deidara was capable of making the clay bombs even smaller to the point where they could hide in his sand, where they could possibly be used to take Gaara out, which is something he didn't need the Sharingan to do, right? Because the clay bombs that took out Gaara were still visible to his naked eye. He simply didn't deduce that it was possible, while conversely, Sasuke was able to deduce the workings of Deidara and his clay bombs, again, with the Sharingan certainly aiding him, such as being able to perceive the hand signs that he utilized, which Gaara is just not capable of doing. But overall, again, we do deduce that Sasuke has the better intelligent feats. Again, because of the tools he does possess that Gaara doesn't, and because of the intelligent feats he is capable of he's able to accomplish in comparison to Gaara. So again, Sasuke gets the point on this aspect as well. But moving to the next aspect, now with this aspect, we believe this discussion starts to become even more interesting, as we certainly must discuss Shikaku at this point in the narrative, with this aspect being Hack's abilities. But did you want to start out with this one? What do you think about Gaara's Hack's abilities here?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So first and foremost, these two combatants in question have completely different arsenals and
Oh
hacks
yeah,
abilities, respectively. So Gaara has a completely different array of abilities, like I just mentioned. He specializes in terrestrial manipulation, being able to fly as a result with sand, can terraform it if the occasion calls for it, having the ability to manifest sand from minerals in his terrain as well. He can manifest extra eyes to increase his vision, and has what the sand call the ultimate defense with this unique Shikaku infused sand, which has a bigger density and is also faster, as mentioned on several occasions. He also does have this unique ability in which the iron harvested from the blood of his foes actually does continuously harden the density of Gaara's sand as well.
yeah,
With Shikaku, it is interesting because Shikaku not only does give Gaara bigger density and bigger speed, but you have to be obviously faster than Gaara's instinctual sentient sand, if you will, to even stand a chance against him. And as we have mentioned earlier, his durability is quite insane. But
yeah,
yeah.
exactly. That's a good point. So to steal man further, like we have been throughout this video, as we all know, at this point in the narrative, Gaara is still the one-tailed Jinchuriki. Gaara possesses many tools with his sand, which Shinobi also iterated, which includes abilities such as the Sand Tsunami, Sand Coffin, and his infamous Sand Eye, which allows him to be completely protected in a sand dome while still being able to observe the battlefield and his opponent, which is very useful in battle. Additionally, as we have said previously in the video, he can manipulate vast quantities of sand to protect and or attack his opponents, with even just the sheer weight of sand being enough to suffocate and crush most opponents he faces. Now, with Shikaku rampaging and emerging, we can deduce that he is low to blatant Kage level, as Shikaku stalemated Rasa multiple times when Rasa attempted to kill Gaara during his youth, which actually allows us to most likely also deduce that at this point in time, with Shikaku, he's probably even more powerful, as typically as Jinchurikis age, especially if they have seals, they typically become more and more powerful. For example, with Naruto seal. So that's also a possibility here. So Gaara certainly possesses many hacks with his sand manipulation ability, like Shinobi said, from terraforming, contorting large volumes of sand, etc. So he possesses quite the arsenal here of hacks. But going to Sasuke here, Sasuke possesses also a plethora of abilities, from variations of lightning natured attacks to Sharingan Genjutsu and visual prowess, enough actually, a lot of people forget this, to temporarily shut down the chakra link between a Jinchuriki and their tailed beasts, as he did with Naruto and Kurama when he was about to kill Team 7 led by Yamato at the time. He also of course possesses enhanced physical durability, physical prowess, and enhanced regenerative abilities thanks to Orochimaru being absorbed by him. Finally, of course, he is even capable of achieving at bare minimum a 10 times amplification in power thanks to the curse mark being able to go to the CM2 stage, indicating that all his attacks, including Kirin, receive a substantial boost in potency and destruction as well. So both of these individuals do possess a large quantity and plethora of abilities. But what did you think about Sasuke's hacks here, and how do you think it compares to Gaara's here in this battle?
Yeah, yeah, Uchihas are broken.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
uh, So yeah, so like you've mentioned, first and foremost, Sasuke has the Sharingan. It's a tool of precognition, if you will, in which his opponent needs to be considerably faster than Sasuke to even blitz his perspective in the first place. Having the Sharingan gives the user an innate ability of Genjutsu as well, which Sasuke is not a slouch at all. He's not comparable to Itachi, of course, but it is a tool that could be implemented on people who are not resistant, like Gaara, for example. Like Jay, I mentioned, the CM2 does give him flight as well as durability, extra AP, and the regeneration is actually pretty damn good because actually after his wing got blown off, we see it just get regenerated right away. So it is something to take note of. But in terms of who has a better array of abilities and how they would fare against each other, one, it is certainly contingent upon the terrain that these combatants are in, but in terms of just in a neutral location or setting, I would definitely give the nod to Sasuke, just because having the Sharingan, Genjutsu, he can fly as well as Gaara. The durability is enhanced, the AP, his reflexes, and already really impressive speed, already amped by the CM2 is enough said already, right? So, in terms of just diversity, his jutsu diversity is quite impressive as well, ranging from Raiton to Fireball jutsus to just a lot of things he can utilize. So, combined with Genjutsu and his already like tangible stats, I would definitely give the nod to Sasuke here as well.
We even said this before the video. Essentially, truth be told, Sasuke possesses a kryptonite arsenal to someone of Gaara's talents. Because not only does Sasuke have the elemental advantage, as we have established already, but he even has the ability again to sever the link between Gaara and Shukaku if need be temporarily, like he did with Naruto and Kurama earlier in Shippuden. Additionally, he has hacks capable of beating an individual with even Genjutsu resistance, as he was able to attempt a Genjutsu attack against Deidara, who has again Genjutsu resistance due to his hate for the Uchiha, and then, thanks to the Sharingan, was able to, in a way, blitz Deidara with an attack after he attempted to kill him with nanoscopic bombs. And this was all thanks to the Sharingan again being able to perceive the hand signs of the clay bomb jutsu utilization. So simply put, it is quite clear Sasuke has the overall advantage in Hack's abilities in this matchup. Again, basically having the Kryptonite arsenal to someone of Gaara's talents. And once again, Sasuke gets the point on this aspect as well. So, to go into the final aspect of scaling that we thought was relevant here, we have win conditions. But what did you think about Gaara's win conditions here to kick off this part of the video? What do you think about his win conditions?
Yeah. Gaara certainly is situational here, right?
Yeah,
There are ways he could win, right? Let's not say he absolutely has no chance. And same for Sasuke, right? This is um, a, a a competitive battle to say the least. But with Gaara, there is one way he can face against Sasuke and his like hacks from tangibles, like we discussed with the Sharingan. They have faced off before in the Chunin exams, and the Uchiha name is quite notable and has quite a lot of notoriety. Especially as a Kazekage, he would know that Genjutsu would be a threat. And as we have discussed earlier, covering his body and eyes with his ultimate sand and using the sand eyes as an extra perception amp can outright negate the threat of Genjutsu altogether. There is the question of the air mobility and in question between the two of them, and also the durability with Gaara. If he's able to manipulate enough sand from his terrain around him, it is hard to say that if he can tank a C3 bomb from Deidara, then how is Sasuke gonna just Chidori him in the air, right? So
yeah,
we'd have to say that like Gaara is fast enough to manipulate the sand and do all these things in the first place. So it is contextual, it is situational. There are prerequisites that have to be met, but they can be achieved, and that's how I would see Gaara taking advantage. It would probably come down to if he is fast enough, like I've said, the defense is being so too hard to maneuver past, so that it really comes down to a battle of attrition.
yeah.
And with Shikaku and being a Jinchuriki, he's got quite a lot of chakra to utilize. So
Exactly, yeah. So for Gaara, like Shinobi said, it is safe to deduce the environment would certainly factor into his chances of success, indicating that if he and Sasuke were to combat in a desert per se, his chances would certainly be better with sand being abundant in usage there. One of the best win conditions for Gaara would be to utilize large amounts of sand, like Shinobi said already, to throw Sasuke off and keep him on the defensive to avoid the Genjutsu threat or any problematic lightning natured attacks from coming at him directly. Perhaps also implementing this strategy until fatigue begins to kick in for Sasuke would be advantageous as well, as his physical stats and attack potency would also begin to diminish in the process. Now, aside from this sort of multiple angle large scale attack, the only other good condition, win condition, would be Gaara allowing Shukaku to take over, which would make Gaara most likely more powerful, possibly. However, even that's contentious given how well Gaara did it without Shukaku against Deidara. Also, on top of the fact he never seemed to decide to use Shukaku on top of that. Hence, truth be told, the win conditions for Gaara are not very abundant when analyzing and deducing his best options for success against Sasuke. However, again, environment would greatly alter the chances of success for him, dependent upon the geography that they are combating on, and also the parameters established as well, right? Like Shinobi said, with enough sand already at his disposal from the initiation of the fight, that would certainly aid him. However, if he doesn't have sand sort of already distributed amongst him for combat, Sasuke's speed, as we has established, is superior, would be a problem as he could possibly blitz him before sand could be utilized effectively, as he is faster, as we have deemed earlier in the video. Now, as far as for Sasuke, with win conditions in mind, there are multiple win conditions that are likely for him here. He could blitz Gaara with a lightning natured attack. As we have established again, he has superior speed, and that he could cut through most sand defenses, more likely with him again having the elemental advantage and the volume of the sand not being too great. He could also possibly Genjutsu Gaara, again, with Sasuke having the skill of severing temporarily the chakra link between Shikaku and Gaara, and kill Gaara afterward. Also, if he really wanted to be thorough, he could even use Kirin to wipe Gaara off the face of the planet. Truth be told, with the very high AP that attack possesses, especially in his CS2 state, with the 10-time power amplification it provides, essentially possibly even being higher than C3 in theory, if you take into account the destruction Kirin did without CM2 being utilized. So there's a possibility that the Kirin could even be superior to C3 bombs, which is a high level of AP, plus the elemental advantage he would have, which would be very detrimental as well, indicating that Gaara would have to use an insane amount of sand to tank something of that caliber, possibly an island-sized level of sand, which is a gargantuan amount of sand to utilize, which we don't see Gaara use very often. It would be very difficult to tank something of that caliber. What are your thoughts on Sasuke's win condition, and who you think has the advantage in this aspect in the with win conditions here?
I certainly agree with you, bud. Yeah,
Yeah.
Sasuke definitely just has multiple ways to make this more favorable for him at the end of the day. He already has the proven speed feats to outright blitz Gaara, if need be, before he gets into the air and starts causing a ruckus with the sand manipulation and defenses and etc. Right? So
Yeah.
that's certainly a possibility. I don't see Sasuke wanting to prolong the battle if he doesn't have to. He's quite intellectual in that department, at least. If he does have the Kirin, like you've already mentioned, even though the Kirin didn't like destroy as big of an AoE as the C3 Golem would per se, having the elemental advantage is quite noteworthy to say the least. And Sasuke, if he really wanted to, could in some way have a rendition of that scenario with using a lot of feral jutsus, etc., to make the prerequisites happen in the first place. But yeah, with speed, Genjutsu would certainly be problematic. The elemental advantage, etc. I definitely see Sasuke winning in multiple fashions here.
Yeah, exactly. So it is quite clear that Sasuke has more win conditions than Gaara in this matchup again, essentially being the kryptonite combatant to Gaara in his talents overall. So it's very clear that Sasuke gets the point in this one as well. So, hence, in conclusion, we nearly have a sweep as far as who has the advantage in the various scaling aspects we have discussed, with it being 5-1 for Sasuke. Now we get to probabilities and levels of difficulty. Did you want to begin with the probability for each winning as well as the difficulty here?
Yeah, so going over Sasuke first and foremost, the probability of him winning this engagement at the end of the day is quite likely considering his unique arsenal of abilities with the Sharingan, precognition, tangible stats in speed, flight, CM2, etc. Considering that he has multiple ways to win this engagement, I would say the likelihood to be on the safe side would probably be around, I think we both agreed, about 70%.
Yeah.
They do have intel on each other. Gaara does have ways of winning, perhaps contingent upon terrain and situation, of course. But considering Sasuke's intelligence, speed, and points that we've already addressed in this matchup, I would say Gaara has a 30% chance of winning, Sasuke 70% at the end of the day.
Okay, so yeah, we both agree with the probabilities and statistical percentage of each coming to victory. As far as levels of difficulty, Sasuke at worst would have mid difficulty in most scenarios against Gaara, while conversely, Gaara with his 30% probability of victory would have extreme difficulty in defeating Sasuke, given that again Sasuke is essentially the kryptonite to Gaara in this one. For Gaara to have that probability, to have the odds on his in his favor. Again, he'd have to have the geographical advantage, fighting at a desert perhaps, and perhaps Sasuke being more arrogant, perhaps on some random day during this day where he's more arrogant and is not as cutthroat nor as calculated, which we saw, I guess, to be fair, in early Shippuden when he was about to annihilate Team 7 due to their inferiority. But again, this is very unlikely, which is again why Gaara only has about a 30% chance, and that's being generous to an extent with Gaara. So Sasuke, all in all, certainly the superior shinobi here, having superior physical stats as well as superior hacks and ninjutsu, with Sasuke even having the elemental advantage with his arsenal as well. And there you guys have it. That is our analysis and dissection of this interesting battle that we both thought was worth discussing. And of course, feel free to leave your thoughts on our scaling and on this matchup in general, as I'm sure some of you guys have disagreements despite our calculated approach. Anyways, we hope you folks enjoyed, and we'll see you in the next video. Stay classy.
Good guys.